Hello BookTube, this is part 4 of my 2022 library tour. Today I'll be doing the poetry. It's still perpetually paltry, even though its footprint is pretty much almost gobbled up. I currently have my poetry on half of a wall shelf. Let's get going with the books, and hopefully there won't be any interruptions, any technical difficulties, which happened earlier when I tried to film this video. Anyway, so first up is the collected poetry of Nikki Giovanni. I first discovered or encountered Nikki Giovanni's work in a reader for an English class or reading class I had in middle school, and I loved that poem and I wanted to read her work ever since. I've read a more recent collection of hers that I quite enjoyed, and when I saw this collected edition, I had to have it. Quite happy to have it. Definitely looking forward to a reread. I had a not quite a similar encounter with Amiri Baraka. I first encountered his work. I'm pretty sure I read him in a modern American poetry class when I was in college, but for sure I read or I watched a video that used one of his poems that I absolutely adored, and I wanted to read more by him, so I checked out a few of his books from the library and quite liked it. And when I saw SOS Poems 1961 to 2013, I had to have it, and I'm quite happy. Next up is a poet I've loved. Again, I first encountered him through the Modern American Poetry class. I was assigned to do a short paper on him or presentation on him, and loved his work, and that is Robertson Jeffers. This is his selected poetry. I had this a few years ago and stupidly traded it in and regretted it, and happy to have it back. The next two books are by a poet, one of my favorite poets, that is of Wisława Szymborska. This is View with a Grain of Sand. I first encountered Szymborska on the Nobel Prize Literature website. They'll occasionally, or at least at the time, would have selections of poetry by the various poets who've won. In the poems by Szymborska that they had, I enjoyed, and when I was at Book People in Austin, I saw this and had it, and I've had it for 15 plus years now, and I read it nearly every year, and I love this collection. And about 2 years ago, I was on the Powell's website. Powell's is the storied independent bookstore in Portland, Oregon. During the pandemic, I read an article about how Powell's was struggling, and I wanted to help them financially, as I also have been doing with Book People intermittently, and Fabled independent bookstore in Waco. But so one of the first purchases from Powell's that I made recently is a collected edition of Szymborska's work. This is Map, Collected the Last Poems. I love this collection. It is just wonderful. Next up is another poet I really enjoy, and a collection I've had for ages, and that is Counting Myself Lucky, poems or selected poems from 1963 to 1992 by Edward Field. I first encountered Edward Field in an anthology of American gay poetry, which we will get to in a few books. I first bought this collection, loved it, and ordered a few more books by Edward Field, one of which is Stars in My Eyes. This collection collects all of the Hollywood poems Field wrote to, I think, the 70s. I really love this collection. Had it for a while, stupidly got rid of it and regretted it, and picked it back up about a year or so ago, and quite happy to have it back. Yeah. So it also includes a number of steals from various movies. Here's one from She, the 1930s version. There's also one from the 60s starring Ursula Andress. There's a poem about Joan Crawford. So there's a number of stills of Joan Crawford, that sort of thing. Yeah, I love this collection. Next is The Dream of the Unified Field by Jory Graham. This is a selected collection from 74 to 1994. I want to say I first encountered Jory Graham in that Modern American Poetry class, and I saw this at Book People, bought it. I mean, I traded it in and I re-added it within the past year or two. And quite happy to have it back. I've read it a few times since and loved it. Next is Voluntary Servitude by Mark Wunderlich. Again, I first encountered Wunderlich through the Anthology I spoke about earlier, and bought this collection from Book People, loved it, ended up trading it in for some Hongo comics at some point, and I've regretted it, and quite happy to re-add Voluntary Servitude back to my collection. A book that I have never gotten rid of, although I did get rid of the collected works by the same poet, and that is The Changing Light at Sendover by James Merrill. This is the big epic poem that Merrill wrote, inspired by the Ouija and the occult and stuff. I've read it ages ago and remember quite enjoying it, but I haven't come back to it since. And I do regret not having his collected poetry. I really need to make an effort to re-add that. Next up is a collection that we saw not too long ago in a weekly reads, and that is the Go-Go Boy Sonnets by Edmund Miller. This is a collection of sonnets inspired by the men of the New York City gay club scene from the 80s through to the early 2000s. I bought this collection, I think, at the instigation of a professor and really enjoyed it, although it had been some time since I reread it. I recently did and really enjoyed the rereading. Next is the anthology I've been speaking of, and that is A Word of Mouth, an anthology of gay American poetry edited by Timothy Liu. I bought this book on my first trip to Book People. I went to tour the St. Edward's campus in Austin, and before we left, I don't know if it was the admissions counselor or one of the student tour guides mentioned Book People and gave us directions, which from St. Edward's it is quite easy. You just go down Congress towards the Capitol, make a left at 6th Street, go down to Lamar, and Book People will be on the right. It's in a little shopping complex there. I went there, I loved it, I saw this and just had to have it, and I've loved it ever since, although it has been a while since I've read this collection or anthology, and that it needs a rereading. I discovered so many poets through this anthology. Mark Dottie, Mark Wunderlich, Justin Chen, Edward Field, David Trinidad, so many. Okay. Next is a collection that is relatively a recent purchase within the last year, and that is Troy Unincorporated by Francesca Abate. This is I first purchased, I think this was my first purchase with Midtown Scholar. It's a bookstore in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that I've come to really enjoy shopping with them online. And this collection, it draws inspiration from Troilus and Cressida by Geoffrey Chaucer. Next up is a big collected edition, collected poetry. This is Louise Gluck's Poems, 1962 to 2012. I'm pretty sure I encountered Gluck before in either like an American Lit class or the Modern American Poetry class. And I really do love this collection. It has a lot of wonderful poems. Another recent purchase, and a poet that I've recently encountered, and that is The New Black by Evie Shockley. I've read it twice, and my second reading, I love this collection even more. It's wonderful. Next is a little more Robertson on the Human, new and selected poems by Gillian Connolly. Interesting thing about this collection is that whereas most new and selected collections tend to organize the selected poetry via previous collections, Connolly doesn't do that with this collection. She completely rearranges the collection in a new thematic way, and it is quite interesting. It makes me want to pick up her earlier work to see like how things kind of panned out. Next is a collection by one of YouTube's own. This is The End of Everything by Matt Wall. I got this through a giveaway that Matt was running a few months ago, and I actually didn't know I'd won it until I watched the video, and I'm like, a few days after, and I'm like, ooh. So I contacted him, gave him my address and everything, and he sent this, and I've quite enjoyed it. There are quite a few really good poems in there. Next is a poet that I've been interested in for a while. This is the Collected Poems of Philip Larkin. I picked this up from Book People a few months ago, and I first encountered Larkin through a video on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel that reads poetry, although I don't think they are active anymore, because this is like decade plus. And I love the rendition of This Be the Verse by him. And yeah. And I've wanted a collection by him ever since. I think I might have read him while I was at St. Edward's, but I don't know for sure. Next up is Poems by Elizabeth Bishop, who I encountered in that Modern American Poetry class, and I picked this up recently from Book People. It was in the same order as the Collected Poems of Philip Larkin. Next is the other book I had in my first purchase with Midtown Scholar. This is Alliance by Peter Campion. This is one of his earlier collections, and I really enjoyed it. And I really want to add more of Peter Campion's collections. So maybe eventually the University of Chicago Press will have some of his work on their cell catalogs. Another University Press collection I picked up. I think this one I got from Majors and Quinn, but I don't know for sure. And this is A Larvae of the Neurosaurus by Catherine W. Carter. This is out from LSU Press. And I actually did think about picking this up from LSU Press, because LSU Press does, at least intermittently, a big site-wide sale of like 40% off. But I actually picked this up from a used bookstore, and I love this collection. I've read it twice, and it's really good. Next is Fire to Fire, New and Selected Poems by Mark Dottie. Again, I first encountered him through word of mouth, and I picked up his collection source from Book People and traded it in stupidly. And I do want it back, so I'll probably pick that up. I did have some issues when I first tried to read this collection, but on a reread, I really fell in love with it and quite happy to have it in my collection. The next 4 are all recent purchases. I think within the last, I think they were part of my December book haul, actually. And so the first up is Flyover Country by Austin Smith. I first saw this on the Princeton University Press's website. I was nosing around the poetry and saw this and was intrigued and quite happy to have it. I really enjoyed the collection. Also from the University of Princeton, or Princeton University. I always want to say University of, even though in this case it's Princeton University. Anyway, this is Rain in Plural by Fiona the Lorraine. This is also really good. I picked these 4 up from Libris. Moving on to the University of Chicago, or at least distribution-wise. This is actually from the University of Alaska Press. This is, I thought there would be more Wolves by Sarah Ryan. This one, the Permafrost Book Prize. And quite an interesting collection. And finally, from Kevin Carey Press through University of Chicago, this is Wunderlich by Catherine Dottie. No relation, as far as I know of, to Mark Dottie. This is a really interesting, very visceral collection of poetry. Yeah, so that was the still perpetually paltry poetry collection. Sorry if this version of the video is a bit rushed. I was a bit more expensive in an earlier one, but my tablet decided to be a pain in the rear end and stopped the video halfway through. So annoying. Anyway, I will be back tonight or this evening with weekly reads. And of course, I'll be back on Monday with part 5 of the library tour. We will be moving on to the other half of the wall shelf. This will be the non-history, non-fiction. The history side right there. So anyway, BookTube, until this evening, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.